Okay, hey everyone. We still have a few more minutes until we actually start, but I thought that we can, start with kind of the opening comments. So, papers actually start at 10:15, and then we have more time for Q&A. It's last day, people rushing. Thank you so much for coming. It's an amazing thing to see so many people on a data session on the last day, and I know we will all be very grateful we're here. We are all extremely privileged and grateful to be here in Kipuktuk, which is colonially known as Halifax, that is located in Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, on whose territory we are so grateful to be having this conference. I personally come from Toronto, which is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat people. This is using data to end homelessness, and we will hear from an agency level to a systems level examples of how data is being used for action towards ending homelessness. Each presentation will have 20 minutes, and we'll have them one by one, and then we will have the Q&A. And of course, feel very free to also contact our presenters via email later if you have questions or follow-up. And we will do it in the order of appearance. And we are starting with Kate and Emily from the Dropping Center in Calgary, and we will hear from them about housing advocacy tool using data to improve programs for chronic shelter users.
I don't think you guys can see me from behind the laptop.
Hit F5.
F5?
F5. There you go.
Can you see me? I'll stand on my tippy toes, it's fine.
Yeah, did anyone have a booster?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming, especially on the last day. I know you guys could all be eating lobster by the waterfront, but you're here with us, and we really appreciate it. I'm Kate. I'm the Senior Manager of Housing. This is my colleague, Emily Gunn. She is the project coordinator at the DI. So yes, thank you for coming. We're really happy to be here on our last day. So Emily and I make our home on Treaty 7 territory in Mohkinstsis, now known as Calgary. We do a lot of work with our DE&I committee from an agency perspective. But we acknowledge that we have a long way to go on our reconciliation journey. So it's been a slow process for us. We're really proud of the work that we're doing. But we're also two white settlers making a tool that doesn't always get it right. And we know that. And so we're working on kind of what the gaps are. But we truly are not capturing the Indigenous experience in this tool. But we can talk about that a little bit later. So the DI is massive. So I think last night, we had probably about 700 people within 24 hours accessing services. And our last point in time count was about 2,700. So I'm really not good at math, but Jeff could probably help me. But I think that's about 20% of Calgary's homeless population staying at the DI at any given time. We could probably spend the whole 20 minutes talking about what the DI has to offer, but we can chat about that via email. So we're more than emergency shelter. We pride ourselves on being housing focused, and we think of ourselves as a part of your journey, not the destination for anyone needing our services. So we have everything from health services, hygiene, free home goods, addiction supports. We try to be pretty comprehensive in what we're able to provide.
Hi, so our mission today is we want to share with you our process of, in this very large organization where we have a ton of sort of functional data, how do we make sense of it, and how do we try to derive meaning from it without increasing the burden on folks who are navigating a system that already requires them to divulge their story over and over again and continue doing that throughout their experience. And then we're going to talk a little bit of one of the ways that we've tried to apply the housing advocacy tool. The one thing really want to emphasize is it is a work in progress. So even in the development of this presentation, the tool already changed. And there's so much knowledge that was shared here so far this week that we already have ideas to adapt it when we get home. So I will share a bit about that process. So as Kate mentioned, we're a very, very large agency, and because there's so many services that are provided, there's a lot of information that does kind of come into our system. We use a kind of a private data collection, data storage system that brings in everything to from sleep check-ins to the engagement between our wonderful staff and the folks that are in the building. And it's a large database. So in our most recent report to community, we were able to share that like almost 7,000 people, unique people, accessed our programs last year. And that can be roughly like 500 people using our sleep services. And on top of that, that is, 552,000 meals served on site. So the scale of the information we have is quite large, and really excited. This is kind of setting up some future things, I think, is that sometimes with large data, the quality isn't always perfect. So we are looking at this tool as what is an ideal environment to use this information as we work through data quality issues and bringing what we're collecting kind of up to the level that we want.
So no matter how much we've tried over the last few years, we started this journey in 2020, our long-term chronic shelter use is still happening. We've built programs, we've had really creative ways of addressing it, but it's still happening, which is why we're trying to stay really adaptable. But out of COVID-19, Emily and I were tasked, I think the first 3 months of COVID, we probably made 100 triage lists for shelter clients to be able to go somewhere safe, where we were working with Alberta Health Services to make sure we were keeping people safe. But it was so many lists and so many spreadsheets. We were trying to shove people into a box, figuratively, of course. And as hard as we tried, we were low, mid, and high acuity. We kept using that term, but then we stopped and really thought, what does that mean and why? And why are we labeling someone to be high acuity, knowing that that would be a major barrier in them getting future housing opportunities? So with COVID, we really had the time to look at who was in our building, understand what their needs are, and kind of flip that data on its head, which we'll talk about, and try to make it not deficiency-based and more positive. Yep.
Forward and back. Oh, no,
There we go.
our slides are up.
So I hesitate, my bosses are in the room, and I'm hesitant to show this slide and how many times we've had to go back to the drawing board and start over. So 2020, it was the triage and acuity tool. That is where we were shoving people into boxes, saying from our best guess what was high needs, medium needs, low needs. But we felt that it was biased, and we were really proud of the tool. It was super user-friendly, but what was the added benefit when it was, you know, we already know the people, but this was not going to create change within our agency and within the sector, which is what our goal is. 2021, we started the Housing Matching and Services tool. It was housing-focused outcomes. It was forecasting people's housing, but we can forecast till the cows come home. But if the sector can't respond or build programs, there isn't much benefit. Which brings us to current day, our housing advocacy tool, strength-based, housing first. What was very important to me, as someone, Emily mentioned, I'm on the heart tone. So what's really important to me is that these are not just numbers, these are human beings who are trying to survive in a really, really chaotic environment. And so it was very important to me that we're telling stories with our data, we know who these people are, and that we're kind of, instead of being super deficit-based and thinking this is what we think the person needs, it's much more storytelling. So as I said, as of 10:22 a.m., it's the housing advocacy tool. We think we're going in the right direction. Emily will kind of get into the meat and potatoes of what the tool is. But yeah, we've come a long way, that's for sure.
Great. So I assume many of us have had to use a lot of tools before. So a lot of the categories up here might look very familiar. And that kind of comes from the journey that this tool has sort of evolved from, but anticipate some of these might change. So the tool kind of has 3 different sections to it. And it is a resource that we see as how do we organize this information on the back end to paint a picture as to what different needs are becoming present in shelter. And we're very contextual that this is a very specific environment, and that just because things look a certain way in shelter doesn't mean that that's what their life is like everywhere else. Doesn't describe their experience before shelter, and definitely will not describe their experience outside of shelter. So we have a series of auto-populated information that is really helpful for kind of stratifying and understanding the different population in the building and seeing if there's trends there. In Calgary, there's a lot of presentations from this week in Calgary, so we probably heard a lot about the sector as a whole and the multiple different types of services, and a lot of times they are based on these stratifying characteristics. So we want to make sure that we have that so that we can look for those patterns. The middle section is sort of the part that keeps changing for us, and really looking at some of the kind of typical categories that are used in a lot of tools, because that's the language. If we're trying to advocate, we need to be kind of speaking about similar things. But trying to look at how the language we use and the information that we look for as we go through these different categories. And then at the end, I'm a social worker. Having just numbers just is deeply insufficient. So we wanted an opportunity to learn from what we're reading. So it is an opportunity to not leave anything out if we read something that we missed. And it's an opportunity for us to learn and grow with the tool. Oh, I'm so sorry. I hit the wrong button many times. I know. If you slide across the trackpad, takes you right to the end. You still have time. So this is just one. We have 2 of these sections that we just wanted to put up to show it. And again, this is where the change and the flexibility comes. And in this version, we sort of look at each of these categories on a spectrum, and knowing that people are in the building because they are trying to survive and they're trying to get their needs met. And we hold a lot of power and responsibility as a large program that has the infrastructure and the responsibility to try to meet those needs. And so everyone in the building is trying to survive. But then where are we as supporting them with achieving the goals that they want, whatever that means, as they try to exit shelter. So that's sort of the spectrum that we've got. So on here, that's why we have the survival as priority. And then at the top, we're talking about the people who might have a plan, or this is, maybe their plan is just everything is exactly the same. Something that we wanted to be really mindful is just because we don't see it or hear it or write it doesn't mean that they're not doing work independently or with other agencies. So it's a very kind of agency perspective. What are we doing to support their journey? Yeah, I'm not going to read all these slides out. That is too much for a Friday morning. So this is sort of another one, and we wanted to put this one up because this is probably, and there's been some great presentations about the use of service restrictions. And again, talking about that power and responsibility, service restrictions should never be taken lightly, and we have to be intentional. And we also have to acknowledge that every service restriction is multi-party on the responsibility in those situations. And just because someone has a service restriction doesn't mean that we have all the pieces. So we wanted to really look at what is happening in these service restrictions and what can we learn from them. So a service restriction for someone defending themselves is very different than a mutual fight or things like this. So we did a lot of consultations, not only with other programs in our building, but also with some people from other agencies, and we talked to some folks who went through our shelter and tried to get an understanding of how we should prioritize and what type of language we should be using. Yeah. Oh, look at our timing. We're doing great. All right, so we came here today to talk about how we see this tool as helping with chronic shelter use in our building. We have some folks who have been with our agency for decades, and that falls on us to try to figure out how to support them and advocate for them outside of the room as well. So this list too even is different than what we've done, so apologies. But we pulled, with some consultation with other people, we have so much data and information about how many nights and how many consecutive nights people spend with us. And our definition of chronic shelter use is 75% in a year, in 365 days. But that, I think we can all agree that you shouldn't have to spend 271 days in a shelter to get access to like special programs. And so with someone who's in the room, kind of was able to highlight how can we shorten that time frame and look at people or look at the data in 90 days and maybe not predict, but identify some people who might become chronic use of shelter users. So from this, what we realized when we looked at this and kind of tested it with this group is data quality is something that we need to constantly revisit and improve. In a large shelter, some of the documentation is not aligning with all of our like strength-based goals all the time. And so we need, as an agency, need to make sure we are capturing more of the stories because we know we're hearing it, because we hear it, but we're not reflecting that in our information, which means we don't have access to it. In this group as well, we realized that majority of our chronic shelter users are white, middle-aged men. And so why is that the population that is staying in our building long-term? Why are other people not staying in our building long-term? So, highlighting some different groups there. And I think I've been going back and forth on how much detail I get into with this because it is such a flexible process, but we kind of going through it, we realize that there's this emphasis on like trimorbidity and like complex situations. And when we were looking through on it, we were realizing that a lot of people have figured out how to manage these things that we label as complexities on their own in shelter. And they take care of themselves, they take care of their friends, they take care of their peers, and there's a lot of community support that happens in shelter to kind of fill the gaps of maybe what our programs aren't able to do. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about natural supports, but pushes some attention to how can we support the natural supports. And I'm gonna run out of time, so wrap it up. Sorry, Kate.
So next steps, we'll continue piloting. We've had a few really cool focus groups with housing staff. We'll keep testing it. The level of nuance we'll keep our eye on. And yeah, we want to get to the point where we're using this regularly. Again, my boss is in the room and I think I have a deadline, but hopefully we might need to push it. But we just really want to stay insistent on our goal of everyone deserving a place to live regardless of what is happening in shelter, and just wanting this tool to highlight that there is truly a housing emergency happening right now. And yeah, we want to be able to support people no matter what. These are the people who have been very patient with us in all of our iterations, one being in the room today, Dr. Jeff Messier. So yeah, thank you guys for your time, and we look forward to questions after the next group.
Oh, not Alan.
So, thank you so much. And we now move to Ellie and Laura. Ellie from Acre Consulting, with which we work so much and owe so much to, and Laura from the City of Hamilton to present what data should we collect.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. So here's my bio slide. I will not go through it in a lot of detail, but the important thing you need to know about me is my name is Ali Ryder, she, her pronouns, and I am a HIFIS guru. I do lots of work with data systems, in particular HIFIS, but this is a generalizable non-HIFIS presentation. Now, without further ado, are you all ready? Because I know it's Friday morning. Let's see. 2 shelters, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. I'm going to present about 2 fictional shelters, the Data Suck shelter, run by the Montague Housing Corporation, and the Data ARH shelter, operated by Capulet Inc. Just making sure we're all awake on this Friday morning. So let's just imagine these 2 fake shelters are the same in every way other than their name. One of them likes data, one of them does not like data. Now, let me just ask you to imagine for a second, you need a place to stay tonight. You are homeless for tonight. You need to go to one of these 2 shelters. You can't go to both of them at the same time. And this is what your experience is going to be like when you walk through the door. So, at the Data Suck shelter, you're going to meet Mercutio, and he's going to say, hey, come on in. I think there's a bed free. I'll go check. It's not like I keep a record. Oh yeah, you can stay there. I don't need your name. It's fine. And you could go down the street to the Data ARH shelter, where you're greeted with Tybalt, who says, of course we have a bed for you. Please fill out this 8-page intake form, sign these 3 different consent forms. We'll take a photo of you for your facial recognition software. Don't smile. Here's your ID badge. Wait 30 minutes. I need to type all this up, scan your consent forms, and back it all up to the cloud. Now, remember, you are deciding, which one would you like to go to? Hands up for the Data Suck shelter. Hands up for Data ARH. Well, there's always 1 or 2. All right, now it's time, imagine it is time, and you are now a funder. It's the end of the year, you are reviewing the performance of these 2 shelters, and you only have enough money to fund one of them. The Data Suck shelter says, Whoa, it was a super busy year, guys. We helped lots of people, like Benvolio. He says we really helped him get back on his feet. Lots of people are telling us that all the time. There's a super big need for our services. Our staff are working really hard. Please give us more money. Meanwhile, the Dada RS shelter says this year we provided a 6,387 shelter bed nights, which is a 12% increase over last year and an 18% increase over the previous year. We housed 153 households, of which 88% are still in housing 6 months later. We've also noted a 308% increase in the number of refugees this year. We would like increased funding so we can hire an immigration specialist who can provide translation services. Now, you're a funder. Which one would you fund? All right. Of course, these are rhetorical questions. And the answer that I wanted to get you all to today is it's a balancing act. Neither of these is perfect. On the one side, if you don't collect enough information, you have knowledge gaps. But because you're not spending as much time doing, say, data entry, then you have more time to work with clients, which is great. On the other hand, if you collect lots of data, then you know things about the population that you're serving, you know where the services could be best spent, but it's a big ask for the staff and the clients. They're spending a lot of time collecting all that data. So you want to find the sweet spot somewhere in the middle. Now that's a hard spot to find. So I want to present you with, this is my key question for today's presentation is, well, what data should we collect? Some of it is probably nice to have, but not essential to do your job. So how do you know what is the important stuff? And I'm going to suggest that there are 3 categories you should probably consider. The first is information that's required by your funders, because really you don't have a lot of say in that one. So as an example, this might be things like about veteran homelessness or chronic homelessness, which are like federal priorities. Those are pretty common things that you would be required to collect by most funders. But the second category would be things that will help your staff do their jobs. So this could be things like asking people about their monthly income so that you can help them find housing that is affordable and you know what is affordable for them. Or you could ask them if they have any disabilities or mobility limitations to see whether they need an accessible unit. Or you could ask about their contact information so you know how to get in touch with them if you find a unit later. So these are all things that are not completely essential on their own. You don't necessarily need to know everybody that has, you don't need to necessarily ask everyone about their income, but if it would help staff do their jobs, then it is something that you would probably want to collect. And then the third category is information that addresses local priorities. So my co-presenter today, Laura, is in Hamilton, and one of the challenges that they're encountering is that there's a lot of refugees staying in shelters. And so it's a local priority there for, the council has asked them, hey, how many refugees are in shelters? So that would be an example of a local priority. Another local priority might be identifying who has been recently discharged from incarceration, or anything else that might be, on the radar locally. But the key takeaway here is that I recommend you always ask, why are you asking the question? If you're collecting a particular data point, why? What are you going to do with it? What is it for? So here's an example that often comes up in communities. Now, I'm going to use the example of sexual orientation. I am going to disclose at the beginning that I am a cisgendered, white, heterosexual person, and I should probably not be seen as the authority on this topic. So I do apologize in advance if I make my point imperfectly. I actually thought about using a different example, but I think it works well because this is the kind of thing that a lot of communities are trying to figure out how to deal with, and it's not necessarily people with lived experience that identify as being LGBTQ+, that are making the decisions. So please, I ask your forgiveness if I make a messed up. So usually what happens is something like this in a community. There's some sort of negative event related to homelessness and an LGBTQ youth that pops up in the news. So a politician gets pressured by advocacy groups to do something about the problem, make it safer for youth who are LGBTQ experiencing homelessness, but nobody has any data. How big is this problem? How widespread is it? So someone comes up with a solution. Let's just add a question to the intake form. We're going to ask everyone who comes through our door about their sexual orientation. So what's the problem with this? It's an invasive question. And if there's no clear rationale why frontline staff are asking it, then that can be problematic. So regardless of whether a client answers yes or no in this example, they don't receive different services. Remember, it's just a question that we added to the form. We're not doing any action with it. So people who identify as LGBTQ don't get prioritized higher for housing or get a more private bed. The answer to the question does not impact service delivery in my example here. In addition, respondents might not be truthful. There's all kinds of reasons why they might not want to disclose the information to you. So it's reasonable to assume that the resulting data you would get would be pretty unreliable. Let's say that 3% of respondents identify as LGBTQ. You could then draw the incorrect conclusion that that's accurate and that there are very few people with this experience. So that's probably not the case. You could get unreliable data. Also, asking the question could be re-traumatizing for some. They could be homeless because they recently came out to their parents who did not approve, and that's why they're in shelter right now. But there's also the opposite problem. Some people could identify as LGBTQ, but that would have nothing to do with their experience of being homeless. Say a client has been happily married to their same-sex partner for 30 years, but their partner dies, they don't handle it well, they get involved with gambling and substance use, which leads to their homelessness. So they could give you a truthful answer about their sexual orientation, which could be irrelevant for the caseworker. So all this goes to show that it's inadvisable to just add a question to your intake forms without thinking it through. Instead, you could ask a question like, has your sexual orientation impacted your experience of being homeless? This can lead to insight about the causes of homelessness in your community. Or you could ask something like, would you like me to provide you with a referral to an organization that offers services for LGBTQ youth? This will impact service delivery and hopefully provide some concrete steps the caseworker can take. Or if you wanted to simply know how many homeless people in your community identify as LGBTQ+, you could add a question to an anonymous point-in-time count, which might get more complete and reliable data by virtue of it being anonymous. So this is my conclusion. I have 4 golden rules for you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Laura. So the first, always ask why we are collecting a piece of information. A second would be to respect your staff's time. So don't ask them to collect a lot of information that you're not going to do something with. Recognize that their time could probably be better spent, helping your clients. Less is often more. So if you're focusing on collecting a few data points that you deem really, really important, then that will probably get you better data than if you collect a lot of different data points and only, have poor data quality on all of them. And the last one is you really, really do need to know about the client's history of homelessness, which I think Laura's going to pick up on.
I'm trying to do it. Thank you. How are we for time? Good. I'm just going to leave it here. Okay, hi everyone. Can you hear me? So my name is Laura Stanford. I work for the City of Hamilton on our Homelessness Management and Information Systems team. We're a bit of a mix of reporting, evaluation, and sort of IT stuff in the housing and homelessness sector. We really like Allie's golden rules. I talk to Allie all the time. She trained me on how to write reports for HIFIS, so we connect all the time about this stuff. And so I kind of just want to talk a little bit about very practically how we're doing lots of work this year that really sort of encompass some of the golden rules that she's talking about. So while her golden rules aren't like a model I'm trying to sell, I'm just trying to say it is a really nice, simple, accountable way to look at your different IT projects or reporting projects. And so I hope that you get inspired by some of the things that Hamilton is doing. I'm just going to talk about some very specific ones under 2 broad buckets of training and reporting, but we still have, it's not everything that Hamilton is doing. So some quick facts about Hamilton. We are in Southern Ontario. We have approximately 1,800 individuals experiencing homelessness at any given time right now. Our shelter bed system is about 345 permanent beds for singles and about 20 rooms for families. Certainly as the crisis continues, coming out of the pandemic, we have 20 temporary beds still operating for women and 52 rooms for families, which, like many communities, that is hotel rooms. Oh, sure. That's a very odd request for me. I'm usually quite loud. He's nodding.
Be louder.
So just a bit of a background. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but like just for context, we are a HIFIS community. The City of Hamilton is the service manager or community entity. We launched HIFIS, and I say we, but I wasn't around at this time, but Hamilton launched HIFIS 4.0 in late 2019. They were using it for a hot second, like 4 months, and then the pandemic hit. So as you can imagine, we onboard a lot over the last few years, but actually looking at like, are people using it well? Like, where do we need to customize it and not just use it as out of the box from the federal government? None of that work happened. Data entry and understanding and improving those processes was not the priority during the pandemic. I imagine it was the case in many communities. So in 2023, we finally had a second to ramp things up. This isn't a suggestion, but I will say if you are a community that faces a lot of data requests from your council or for funders, and you're wondering why your IT team takes a really long time to answer them, you might want to invest in some roles. And so this year, what made a really big difference, prior to this, it was just myself and an IT applications analyst. They hired a senior project manager to be our manager, which is amazing with the right skill sets. They added a quality assurance specialist who was dedicated to doing quality assurance work full time. And then they added a new role, which is focused on reporting and evaluating our programs. And that is what my current role is. We also started to, in terms of our priorities, and to Ali's point about how do we respect staff time, less is more, recognizing we're not the ones collecting the data, we are the service manager. We really focused on like, what data are we collecting that's going to meet the operational needs of the service providers? What do we need for system planning? Our city council wants to know a lot of stuff. What do our directors need? And of course, we need to meet our funder needs, as everyone does. We wanted to improve transparency of reporting. We really felt like there's a huge disconnect between what the service providers thought we were doing with the data that they were collecting, and so we wanted them to really understand what the requirements were of them, and we really wanted to understand like what are their operational needs and to focus energy there. And we realized through all of this that we needed to train people again. So again, HIFIS was launched in 2019. There was no training after the fact. Agencies were sort of left on their own, and that was a big problem. We heard at the last conference when there was a session on training that overall agencies were struggling with training staff across the board about everything, let alone on how to use a database. And so that was one area we thought that we could really come in and start training staff so that they wouldn't have that burden. So this is just some of the things that we did with our refresher training that, again, hopefully will inspire you. We decided to invest heavily in training. We trained over 150 existing HIFIS users. We've had about 15 sessions. We're not done yet, but we're trying to get through and train everyone. We made our training sector-based. So instead of it being a generic training offered like once a month, we really went out and created training that was for the men's emergency shelter system, for the women's drop-in system. We met with them in advance to plan these trainings. They chose the time and date. I would often go to their team meetings. And the training really focused on the data entry priorities in our community, which for us, as part of coordinated access, really is about getting contact information in the right place in our database. Everyone's collecting it, everyone's putting it everywhere. Getting housing history information, telling people all the time that HIFIS doesn't know someone's homeless. It won't assume that unless you tell it. And so if they're not booked into a shelter, you need to tell it that they're either homeless or housed. And income. Everyone's asking about income. Do you have any money? And yet no one was putting it in our HIFIS database. And so the clients were having to answer these questions over and over again, and workers were having to start from scratch every single time. So that's what our priorities are. We are training, we try to provide as much use case information as possible in the training, and we're also working on a new user manual that provides detailed guidance and definitions for every single field in use in our database. So it's not just about like, please select one. It's more about, here are your 10 options and here's how we define them, and so that staff have more opportunity to know what they're doing. And again, recognizing there's a lot of turnover in our system. Try to streamline HIFIS as much as possible. This is still ongoing for us as well. And then, of course, with housing history, really focusing on the utility. Our community was not good at doing housing history. It's still not good at it, but we are trying to get a lot better. One of the things that we think are working well is providing scenarios for staff. So you are a street outreach worker, you're out in the community, you see someone, you give them snacks and water, you see in HIFIS that their housing status is unknown, and you're like, well, that's not true. I see this person outside all the time. What do you do next? And like, where do you check in HIFIS for certain information? So we're finding that is better than just saying, here's how you enter housing history, and just really sort of connecting it with their actual day-to-day work. In terms of transparency reporting, we're just providing very clear linkages between people's data collection and their reporting. So we're training them on this is what the federal government is interested in knowing about your program. Our primary data source and field for HIFIS, or in our database, is going to be this to do that. Also for programs not using HIFIS, we still have all of our prevention and diversion not using HIFIS, Indigenous organizations not using HIFIS. We got them out of Excel. Generally find that it's not great for everyone to be using Excel, particularly if you're a frontline worker or a program manager. And so we switched to Adobe fillable forms so that the information can be more organized, and we have a lot more room and flexibility to add more content about, like, these are the definitions for these things, this is what we're looking for. We had a ton of drop-in sessions and ongoing engagement every time we launch a new report, which are very purpose-built now to meet operational needs or funder needs or a request for like system planning needs, that we have drop-in sessions. And often people will come to that and they'll just want to run the report for their program and talk to us about, like, why is this client there? Why is it this client there? And they have plenty of opportunity to validate the data. So we don't report on anyone's information anymore to the federal government, to the province, or to city council before they have at least 6 weeks to actually look at and stare at their data and go, this looks good. So they're validating constantly what their data is, and that's a really big shift from what we've been doing for the past 4 years. We also did a ton of cleanup of our reporting in general. Like other communities, we had like hundreds of reports that we had no idea if they were working anymore, what they were telling us. They were all very nice to have reports, but not necessary. Really trying to get detailed housing status in front of people. So any report we're building that's client level data, showing what the housing status is. We really want people to, when they see unknown, that it's not what we want to see. When we see housed, that's great if they are housed, but if they're not housed, it's a bit of a problem. So that is it. Overall, I just want to say, in terms of alleys, respect staff time, less is more, housing history is kind of important, you should do it. I really do think that those simple things when you're planning the work and thinking about your community can really help. And again, we find it's really simple and easy to hold ourselves accountable to. And any way we can help the service providers, we are trying to do. Much easier to do now that we are a bigger team, but I hope that you've learned something. And that is it.
Thank you so much. And we are returning to the foots of the Rockies, and we will now hear from Ellen from Homeward Trust Edmonton. And Ellen will talk about from data pipelines to actionable insights, future-proofing your homelessness data strategy.
Jonathan, can you hit escape?
I can.
There you go.
So this is working. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to Ali and Laura sorry, I forget your names, folks from the DI for such amazing presentations. And I'm really glad that they got to go before me. I was really geeking out at everything that they were saying. So this has been such a fun session, and I haven't even presented yet. So thank you all. This is really amazing. My name is Alan. I work with folks at Homeward Trust Edmonton. And this is going to be my topic. But before I do that, I just want to do a land acknowledgement. I was born a refugee and moved to Canada as a student refugee. And my legal status at the time was a stateless person. But then 4 years later, I got Canadian citizenship, and for the first time, I belonged somewhere and had paper to show for it. And so for me, a land acknowledgement means so much more because this is the land that has welcomed me and given me a place to call home. And so it's always really important to reflect on the land acknowledgement, not just as something that we do, but really rooted in gratitude to the folks that have been in this land for time immemorial. So really feel grateful to be on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq people here. Thank you for having us. Okay, now let's go into the presentation. So what I will be talking about today links to some of the presentations that have come before, and a lot of themes that we've been hearing will continue in this presentation. I'm so sorry, Ali, we collected a ton of data. So I'll be talking about how we make that data make sense for us, but lots of learnings to take back to Edmonton from my fellow presenters here. So I'll give a little bit of an overview and background and context, Edmonton context, show the current state of our data ecosystem, and then I'll talk about some of the new strategies and approaches that we've been taking specifically in the last year to try and make sense of our data and try and catch up with the times. And I'll talk about some of the learnings and the next steps in this journey. So the current state, work at Homelessness Trust Edmonton. Homelessness Trust is the system planner and community-based organization that's leading efforts to end and prevent homelessness in Edmonton. We steward and direct funding from municipal, provincial, and federal governments in order to meet the priorities and community needs around homelessness. As a system planner, obviously data is really, really important, and so we've invested in enhancing our capabilities to make sure that we are enhancing the ability to make better decisions for ourselves, but also for agencies that we work with. So this becomes really important. And we are not a high-fees community. We use efforts to outcome, that ETO. It was made in the US by Social Solutions, now called Bonterra. And one of the things that's really important about this is that we started using ETO in 2009, and ETO was first developed as a case management tool. And so as times has moved and things have evolved, we've kind of like gone into customizing it to meet the needs of our community. But it's really important to understand that it wasn't necessarily designed as, you know, an HMIS or a homeless management information system. With that, we also have coordinated access and have over 60 community partners. These are organizations and agencies that are working in different fields that assess and refer individuals, families, and youth into our by name list. Over the last few years, our organization has expanded and grown. We have over 100 funded programs, projects, and interventions, and our system, ETO, has over 780 users. 780 is also our area code, which I thought was funny. And over 6,000 people go through our by name list each year. So last year we had over 6,541 people come through our by name list throughout the year, and this year we are just over 6,000, so we're probably gonna get to that or more. And so that just gives you the picture of the kind of data that we're collecting and dealing with. So the result of that is, you know, a lot of structured and unstructured data that require transforming into a robust, dynamic data set that can meet the priorities that, you know, Ali talked about and that I'm also going to talk about in the next slide. We didn't work together, but everything is aligning. So, I mean, if you're in this room, you're probably familiar with the service assistant plan organization, or you work in a similar organization. So some of the complex and evolving data needs that we've had to meet, and a lot of this too is like a post-pandemic where the expectation to have real-time data has been made a lot more urgent just because of the times that we're in. And so some of the things that we need our data to do for us and the organizations that we work with are, you know, making sure that we're getting those program insights. So what is working and what's not working. So in addition to being a system plan organization at Homelessness Trust, we also do deliver some services, and so it's really important to understand in those services what is working and for whom is it working for, and what should we be continuing to do. Ali talked about government reporting, so we do spend some government dollars, and so the government have expectations around some of the outcomes that we need to be reaching, so tracking those, it becomes very important. Community engagement, again, you know, some of the presenters talked about how homelessness has become more public than ever before. And so there's a lot of conversation around issues that are going on in each community. For us, it's unsheltered and encampments is a really big issue that's in the news constantly. Council is interested in it. Folks are interested in it. The business community is interested in it. And so it's really important for us, for our data, to speak to the scale of the state of homelessness in Edmonton, the challenges that we are facing, but also some of the positive outcomes that our community is making, so that we can show to community that impact that we're making, but also the challenges that we are facing, so that we're in this together. And then the other part too is decision making. So as a system planner, we need to be able to know, make sure that the programs are working, like I talked about, but also make sure that there's no duplication of services, but also making those like really wonderful decisions to, find a new program that's working, or those difficult decisions to stop funding programs that may not be performing as well in the system. So all of these things have to be, our data system has to be doing all of these things for us. Now, the challenge was that our data system was not responding, the current state was not responding to all of these things at the pace that I would have liked, or that our community would have liked. Our data system looked something like this. So data is entered into our data system, efforts to outcome. We pull a ton of Excel reports. Some go to the direct agencies that we work with, others come to us. We use SPSS to consolidate. I'm glad you like it, Ali. We use Excel to consolidate these data sets, and then we prepare for visualization on Tableau. And so we have a ton of dashboards on our Tableau internal, and then some of the dashboards go on our website to speak to some of those needs that I was talking about. And then sometimes we'd link the data with external data as well to do analysis of what's happening in our community. But as you can tell, it's a little convoluted and complicated, and this required a lot of staff time, and a lot of was slow to respond to some of those council requests somebody talked about earlier, because we had to code everything to answer the questions that were being asked, and had very limited adaptability. And so one of the things that limited us was that our data set that we generated was a limited time data set, and so we couldn't answer historical questions, for example, or it required us to take 2 weeks to code something to answer a simple question. So what do you do about this? So we started building a new data pipeline, and we worked with our friends at Help Seeker Technologies. They're a long-term friend of Homa Trust. They're a social enterprise at the intersection of technology, data, and social innovation. And so we started looking at our processes to develop a new data pipeline of getting all of that data and make sense of it, and then making it usable, not just for us, but also for our partners. So the first thing that we did was to look at the client journey. So setting the stage for matching data that's collected at the client journey in our coordinated access system, and that informed how the code was organized and associated each data point to a program in the system. What that looked like is something like this. So individuals, families, youth come to us. They're connected with some of our 60 coordinated access partners. There's information that's collected at that stage, so demographic information, some of the intake questions like, do you have a source of income or an ID, that help housing outreach workers to know what things to prioritize when they connect with that individual. And of course, the VI SPEDAT, which we are still using in Edmonton, and of course, consent to collect this information, use this information, but also to make referral to other programs. So That's captured. Then once that's done, the electronic file of the family or individual is transferred to our coordinated access program. So that's run internally at Homeward Trust. And here, there's also data that's collected. So we look at they use the metrics to prioritize those individuals for programs that best suits their needs. So they will document that as a priority. We take information as to where this individual connected to us from so that we can look at where individuals are coming to us from in the system. Once the individual is prioritized, and they're connected to a housing team, so intake, or they start actively working towards housing. There's also more data that's collected. So we do the intake SPDAT, we do client efforts documenting that housing search journey. And then when they moved into housing, we collect even more data. Things like our provincial assessments. So these are mandated by our funders. So that meets Ali's conditions. But it's a ton of data that's collected every 3 months just to really track things like service usage, connection to mainstream services, system usage, so that we can show the impact that our programs are having in reducing some of those community resources. And then hopefully they'll move into community, and that's a success story. So as you can see, there's a ton of data that's being collected at each step, and so we needed to make sure that we're merging that data, so that supplementary data is merged at each program, and then each joint or each merge is made according to a business logic. So what does a typical client journey look like? What does it mean to be in this program? This is where things like housing status matter because it's linked to a program. But all of that is like the business logic that we set in the background to be able to make sense of our data. So the outcome of that process was we're still working on this, is a data set that's ready for immediate use. And that's more dynamic and that's user-friendly and that we can use, and we'll see how we use it in the slides that follow. So it looks something like this. So each individual has a unique enterprise ID in our system, and so the data set that we pull will bring up each individual and their journey through our system. So for example, in this one, you see that they're connected with CA for 1 month, but that's the end. So they may have resolved their own homelessness, or they may have moved out of service area. But a year later, they come back, they're connected with our coordinated access system, they move into an intake, so they start the housing search process, but it doesn't go well. As we all know, these are some of the things that happen. And then the next time that they connect with us, they actually get housed in the housing first, and then they move to another housing first, which also happens when individuals are transferring from one housing program to another. So what we don't see is that we have other columns that have all of that other information that is related to that journey. So things like chronicity, things like demographic information, things like housing status, things like why did they move from this one program to another, all of that is connected by that program that they were at. And so at each point in the system, we're able to speed out the data that's related to that point in the system. So once we have this data set, we need to make it make sense for different user groups. This makes sense to me, but it may not make sense to my boss or my boss's boss, or I needed to make quick sense for my boss. So with that, we created or are creating a system report that takes all of that data and makes sense of it. This is fake data, so if you take picture, just know. So what that does is that it takes all of that data that we've synthesized, and then we put a report that gives a kind of like where are we at as a system in real time and in an ongoing basis. And when we're looking at this, we really looked at like what's the audience for this system report. This is something that can go to council, this is something that our senior leadership can use, our CEO can use, because it speaks to some of those key indicators of a system at any given moment. So how many people are newly housed this month? How many people are on our caseload, how many people are on our caseload at the end of the month, how many people are exiting our system, and you can use different filters to look at historical, so if you want to look at the last 6 months, the last 12 months, the last 48 months, it gives you that ability to do that, and we know individuals are interested in like successful exits, as well as housing retention, so those key system indicators are in this report for someone to have an overview of what's happening in the system. Now, that's us, that's the system. How about our partners? So one of my favorite things and things that I really think is important, and some folks have talked about this, is democratization of data. Data can be like really scary, fun for some of us, but like scary for a lot of people. And so it's really important to demystify data by making it simple and making it accessible to all users. So one of our other deliverable or our other outcome of this process is to ensure that every agency that works with us, that we fund, also has access to their own data and has access to the data that we have so that there's no surprise between funder and funded agency. So with that, each team will also have its own agency self-serve dashboard that has the exact same kind of indicators that we also have access to that they can also use to report to their community, to their stakeholders, to gain program insights, so we all have access to the same information. So really kind of some of the changes that have happened with this is really gone from SPSS, and now we're using Python, went from 6,000 lines of code to a more manageable 2,000 lines of code in Python. Our data set that we previously used was limited to 30 months. Now we have a clean data set that's time unlimited that allows us to answer those questions and historical questions really quickly. Limited reporting and analytical capability to a more accessible data, accessible and dynamic data system that is also accessible to everybody in the system, and then a lot of like externalization of data. So with that, that process we've learned quite a bit. But one of the things really that is important one that I would take away is considering the audience. So we've had to do engagement with the sector to be like, hey, if we build a dashboard for you, what would you like to see in it? And making sure that we're building consistent and standard data language. So this is also like really important because when we're looking at housing retention or housing status, number of people housed, exits, what does that mean? Where's that data coming from? If we all have the same understanding as a funder, as the agency, it becomes much easier to have those conversations around program improvement, around evaluation, and all of that really good practices. And of course, rapidly changing environments require that we are adaptable and continue learning. As I talk, this is something that we are also in the process of. This is not finished, and I imagine in the upcoming months and years, we'll continue to evolve these practices so that, well, hopefully we can get it right. Well, that's my presentation, and this is my contact information. Let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, I really want to thank Kate, Emily, Ellie, Laura, and Ellen for really like an amazing session full of very exciting information. I want to also highlight one of the many threads throughout the sensitivity that is characteristic of the work we do to the aspects of the normative and ethical aspects. If it's talking about don't collect data you're not going to use, be conscious of the prices people pay for retelling the stories again and again and again. Be mindful of the prices on workers. Entering data no one ever uses again and again and again. Ellen's amazing point about data literacy, about democratizing data, dispelling anxieties, fear, and this is so inspiring to see all across that people have those sensitivities and are doing this really, really great work. We have half an hour to have a very invigorating Q&A, and I really want to invite people. We have a microphone. We also have a volunteer that can help us with it. And please, question, comments, doubts. Advice, complaints, stories.
Microphones that way.
And if you can begin by just saying who you are, where you're from. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Kristen Kearney. I'm from Guelph, Ontario, and I work at a youth homelessness serving organization. I can't hear you. Yeah.
No, it does work.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's just me, sorry. I talked a lot the last couple of days. I'm wondering about points well received around not being data are us. I think perhaps our organization has been moving too much in that direction. However, in this kind of increasingly chaotic funding environment with different levels of government, I often get a call on like a Thursday afternoon that's like, how many youth do you serve that also intersect with this like system that are, you know, in care, or how many youth do you serve that are LGBTQ plus? And if you can tell me that in the next 24 hours, there might be a funding opportunity, but the door is closing tomorrow. So there, although I would like to say that we could set priorities locally and then look into them intentionally and then come up with solutions, I don't feel like that's the environment we're finding ourselves in. So how do we navigate that without becoming data are us?
This feels like it's directed at me.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify, because Alan was talking about collecting a lot of data in his presentation also. I was saying less is more, and I don't mean to say don't collect data. That's not the message I want you to take away. What I wanted to just say is what Jonathan was saying. Like, don't collect data that you're not going to use, that you don't have a clear reason for it. I wanted to just convey that it's a balancing act, and if you want to collect 20 different data points versus 5 different data points, just think about how much time your staff are spending collecting that. And if they're at the limit, like the breaking point where there's like, well, I can only collect 17, so 3 of them are not going to get collected, then you're probably going to get worse data quality overall. And so that's why I would just encourage you to be careful in making decisions about what is important to collect and what isn't. And I can't tell you what the right answers are because I'm not in Guelph. And so, I mean, part of it is funders, part of it is local priorities and stuff. The key takeaway that I would like to convey is just think carefully about why it's important to collect certain things.
Hello.
Can everyone hear me? I just want to add, so in Hamilton, we have the same problem every day. What we're trying to do as a data team is to just educate a little bit managers, city council directors about what data is available. So when they give us a request exactly like that, we will just say to them, that is not data that we can provide you because it's not currently a priority right now. If that is something you would like to make a priority, then we could put a process in place to collect that more consistently. But right now, we do not have it available for you. That has been going well, but that's what we do now, as opposed to just being like, here's some data that we have on this. We don't really know much about it. So that's how we're trying to fend off that ad hoc stuff of being like, you say it's a priority, and we'll try and figure it out. But for now, that's not something that we are prioritizing, or we've identified as the HIMIS and reporting team for importance. So that might work. I don't know. Don't know your bosses.
Well, thank you all for this really presentation, amazing. My question is for Alan. Actually, I found very inspiring your example of Homeward Trust. It kind of made me think about the Hope Foundation in Winnipeg. I don't know if you've probably heard about it. My question is about if you could probably give us like a little bit more of information about the engagement process of different organizations during the initial phases of creating the coordinated access system. And I mean, concerning their confidentiality issues maybe, or talking about a little bit of engagement or different data technologies that could have been, used at that point by different actors. And I also want to ask you if the by name list was accessible for all the parties, or if there was like a scramble or necessary or something like that. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. I'm going to start with your second question. Yes, our by name list is available to all the agencies that have housing teams. So they're able to look into the list to see who is on the list, and they can request a referral from that list. Our manager of coordinated access is in the room, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. The first question around the engagement that happened when we first developed coordinated access, I really can't speak to that because HomoTrust has been adopted coordinated access, I think, in 2016, 2017, and I wasn't working at HomoTrust at the time, but I know that's something that the community, as a community-based organization, like engagement is a really big priority for us. And that's always the approach that we take because the coordinated access in nature is collaborative. And so feel free to stay back and talk to our manager of coordinated access for more details than I'm able to provide you. She's right here, and I'm happy to connect you too.
Thanks, everybody. Oh. Okay, still on. This is a question for the Calgary drop-in. You guys are developing a really cool tool, and I love that. And it's obviously giving you a lot of information about the services that you provide in your programs. Is it a common assessment tool? Is it system-wide? Is there another system-wide tool that is in place? And how are those interacting, if so?
Yeah, so right now it is very local and isolated just to our agency right now, and using just the information we have internally. In Calgary, for coordinated access, similar to Edmonton, we use the VI-SPDAT. And these we don't pull information or use that as an information source because when we were thinking about the tool, not everyone in our agency has access to that, and so we didn't want to set the tool up where only some people could see the information. And we know that even Calgary itself is going through changes on how they use coordinated access and their data collection there. So we wanted to kind of keep our process a little separate for now so that we can do that sort of more internal reflection and search. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Hi there, I'm Fiona from Montreal. Is this working? Yeah. Interesting, the different model in, you can't hear me?
It's very soft. Like, can you?
Just talk close to it.
Yeah.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Interested with the different models for Edmonton and Hamilton. And following on Carlos's question a little bit, are there groups in your cities who are not participating? And then the other question would be, in your cities, given that you're using different systems, are you communicating that data nationally somehow? Like, is it coming together somehow? Because one of you is using HIFIS, one of you isn't. So those would be my two questions. How many people in your cities are not engaged in coordinated access who are running homeless programs? And yeah, how do you collate that data nationally?
I'll go first. The first question was whether there are some groups who are not participating. So our coordinated access, so I'm trying not to give like very technical and detailed answer, but I'll try my best. So all coordinated access partners have a database in our big database. And so when an individual connects with them, they take their information, and then we do like an electronic referral, which is like a file that just moves from that coordinated access partner to like our coordinated access program that we run for triage and referral to housing programs. Now, one of the things that I talked about ETO not being like an HMIS necessarily, like a homeless management information system, like that's not what it was intended for, like in same way as HIFIS. And so our shelters are not on ETO, so they have other databases that they use. However, all our shelter providers are coordinated access partners. So we're not getting participant level information from a person that accessed the shelter last night, but if that individual is looking for to get on the by name list, the shelter has access, the ability to get them onto our by name list for coordinated access and referral to a housing program. And so we don't have access to shelter stays data. We have to ask the shelter providers to give us that information. But that's the one thing that we've been trying to get to that we're not there yet. I don't know if that answers your question. Sort of, okay.
So in terms of Hamilton, for our HIFIS system, when we launched it, of course, shelters were the priority to get on board, and then the pandemic hit, so any temporary shelters were the priority. And then slowly, once drop-ins were funded by the city, they were added. Rapid rehousing ICM programs, intensive case management were priority. I would say those areas, like we have some permanent supportive housing on there now, some TLP. So our coordinated access system has fairly good coverage. The broad strokes of what's missing is a lot of transitional living programs and, of course, prevention and diversion. We're waiting for the new diversion module in HIFIS. And so we've been holding off in many ways of groups and partners that are in the coordinated access system that we want to bring into HIFIS, but we really wanted to make sure HIFIS was designed well for their work. And so for something like prevention, it wasn't that we didn't have the time or prioritize them, it's just that we didn't feel like HIFIS was going to meet their needs, so we've been holding off. Health partners is another great example, although we are looking at onboarding a health partner for the first time now, and looking at how they can contribute to the system. We do have a case conferencing model in our city, and so that is where often a lot of those partners who are not using HIFIS are engaging in learning about individuals, and that they're being prioritized for more housing-focused supports. And in terms of HIFIS,
yeah, I can speak a little bit to the national, although I'm not the official source on this. But anyways, okay, so it's my understanding that all HIFIS data gets exported to the federal government, and it's anonymized, but all HIFIS data about shelter usage. And then that's used to publish the National Shelter Study. And for communities that are not using HIFIS, they also need to submit a comparable data set. That's accurate, yes? So it does get submitted to the federal government. This is just shelter data, and then they clean it up and compile it somehow. I don't know. Ask Infrastructure Canada that one. The other thing that communities are required to report on is something called the Community Homelessness Report, which will say there were this many people experiencing homelessness in my community last year. And that is just like a report that communities have to plug in the numbers and then send off. So there is national data, even though they're using different systems.
And currently they're using a sample because they are unable to really use all data. They are somewhat aware of the limitations of the data, but we can do a better job promoting that. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much.
So my question's for the Calgary team, and hopefully you can hear me. So could you speak a little bit more to the predictive factors you started to use to identify who might become a chronic user? Because I think oftentimes, at least in my research, when we've tried to use predictive factors, there are a lot of inequity implications and concerns that come up, so I'd love to hear more about that. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you tell where you're from?
San Francisco, California.
Oh,
Thank you.
I won't go into the details because the person who did the work is in the room right now. So Jeff, maybe wave your hand here. So Jeff has worked with our agency for a while, and to speak to those kind of equity issues, I think that was something that was very important from what you can correct me if I'm wrong, but trying to look specifically at the sleep check-in as the single metric. Sam, is this a Sam thing? Yeah. So he's got a paper, and then he created this sort of, not an algorithm, but a predictive assessment for using those sleep check-ins and sleep patterns as the kind of only factor that's brought in, so that you're kind of not bringing in a bunch of additional information. I'm doing a horrible job representing his work. He's way smarter than what I just said. So
we can't get a microphone to you, but if you're
yes.
willing, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad I got the right paper.
So, yeah, I mean, describing it a predictive tool might be a little bit overstating it. It basically is a way of spotting people that are using shelter a lot, right? And it's the notion that if, you know, in the first little while in shelter, your shelter use rate is really, really, really high, that's correlated to the likelihood that you might still be around. So it's based on the notion that if you're using shelter a lot in your first 90 days, you know, it's pretty likely you're going to keep using shelter a lot, so let's not wait a year. Let's have a conversation earlier. But it's really just meant to spot people that, you know, might not be engaging with shelter staff in other ways, and just sort of saying, hey, here's a person that's really around a lot. You know, please engage with this person because they might be having trouble. And so that's why it's really nice that it got rolled into the tool that Emily and Kate developed, because it's not meant to be a standalone thing. Like, I think that's a terrible idea, actually. It's just meant to be, it's meant to be considered in the context of a whole bunch of other things, and it only ever triggers a conversation with staff. It never ever is like predicting, like, you know, this person needs to go here or there. Yep.
Thanks, Jeff.
I actually just wanted to add one thing. I don't know that much about it, but the City of London has also done some interesting work on predicting who will be chronically homeless in the future. So, City of London.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the great presentation. I think my question's mainly for Ali, but I'd welcome kind of any other insights as well. So I work for the Assembly of First Nations. We're a national organization. We advocate on behalf of all First Nations across the country. We implement mandates that are provided to us directly by those First Nations, and we're currently in the process of trying to implement a fairly recent mandate on homelessness, which includes kind of developing First Nation specific data strategies. So that's kind of a complex undertaking because it sort of exists at an intersection of two areas that are really kind of complex to collect data on homelessness, which is subject to kind of all these complexities and limitations, and then also First Nations data, there's also a lot of limitations. Some of those are kind of necessary to protect First Nations data sovereignty. So the data that's out there, it's really limited. And that's kind of just the landscape that we're operating within. So I'm just interested in maybe knowing more about, so often we're asked, you know, by our senior leadership, by the communities that we represent, you know, give us like a stat, like a really kind of like pithy, like useful data point. And when we do that, you know, it's often followed by like 25 asterisks, like what are the limitations of this data? So how can we maybe tell useful and meaningful stories with like kind of really limited and noisy and unavailable data, if at all, that we can do that?
So this is a rare moment where Ellie tells me she doesn't know. Yeah, it's like it usually goes the other way.
That's a good question.
Amazing. This aspect of Indigenous statistics and really get homelessness, specific Indigenous homelessness data right is the most urgent thing to develop, and it is at the moment the least. The BC Infrastructure and First Nations Housing and Infrastructure Council is also very much interested in really advancing that aspect. We want to do a much better job and engage in some serious pilot of really how to exactly answer your question, because we need to admit there is no answer at the moment. And it's on us that we have neglected this. As you say, there are lots of challenges, and because it's hard, we say, yeah, there are other things we can do that are easier. And let's continue this conversation and kind of really think of how we can showcase. And next year in Ottawa, and we will have a data session, a data stream, so we will be able to showcase how we made progress.
I'd love to chat with you, but I don't have an answer.
Yeah, thanks. Let's connect. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Kyle Rollinson. I'm from the city of Red Deer, and I think my question is for Ali and Laura. My question is about, so we talked about like burnout in this industry and turnover, and we have that within our organization as well. And a byproduct of that is I don't know how much too much data is to collect or how little it is. So I'm curious if you have specific instances or processes that you've done to go out to those organizations or to really evaluate if you are collecting too much data. Because it got me thinking a little bit, and just like new to the portfolio in the sector, we collect a lot of data. We use ETO, just like Alan and team at Homeward Trust. And as someone that's a little bit ignorant to the sector and not understanding of what all the data points are being collected for, how would I go out and evaluate and try and scale that down to something that's a little bit more manageable?
I think I have, I guess, a few examples. Overall, how we did it was during the pandemic, and we launched case conferencing, and we're looking at coordinated access. It was very clear the priorities to get people out of shelters, and then to get people living on the streets in the shelters, and to get people connected to housing programs because there were spots available. So what those programs needed in order to make those connections as quickly as possible and as efficiently became our priority. So that was being able to get a hold of someone when they were matched with a housing worker, being able to understand and identify very quickly, like, are they already connected with very often a like provincial social assistance program, and then if they already are, then not wasting time trying to make that connection and moving forward. And then of course, our VI SPDAT we use in the community as well, for better or worse. And so it really was about that information. In terms of overall though, I mean, they are collecting way too much data. Part of this process we also did before we did training is that we asked all of the programs for their intake forms. We do have a common intake form, I think, in Hamilton. I haven't seen it, but I think the essence of it is community sort of program said, like, hey, if we just ask these questions on our own forms, are we good? And so when we collected all of the intake forms across like 30 organizations, they were wild in like, why are you collecting all of this? And some of it's like for us and others is for their programs. And so that's when we really wanted to strip it down. Another project we're doing right now is with our drop-ins in particular. They're kind of new to being city funded in Hamilton, and they collect a ton of data. And they had flat out said like they feel like they need to prove their worth, and that's why they collect a lot of data. And we're like, but you're collecting a lot of data that is not really a priority in our community, and it's not really housing focused. So they're learning a lot about how many times people are coming in for meals and all this stuff. And they were like, well, because you need to know that. And we're like, we don't need to know that. We really are focused about like who your service users are, what connections to housing supports matter. And they were like, but that does matter because it is one day going to lead them to being housed. And we fully agree. And so we're trying to get them like to just take a breath and to realize we recognize the importance of the role of drop-ins in our system, but that doesn't mean they have to excessively collect data. Other areas where that doesn't work so well is the street outreach team. It's the street outreach supervisors here. They're always asked to collect a ton of data. And so we have to try and balance that as best as possible. Sometimes they don't get to say no to city council about that, but we're trying to always advocate for what makes sense and to move the decision makers in the right direction towards data. So I hope that helps a little bit.
A super important point that came up earlier in one of the sessions. The people who make the decisions about which questions to ask are not the people doing frontline. And the principle of nothing for us without us works here as well. Have people that actually do the work in the table deciding those questions, because from the perspective of someone who never asks, yeah, sure, like 60, 100 questions, that makes sense, I want to know, maybe. But this is abusive. It's a horrible thing to answer those questions again and again and again, and they're not being answered well and collected well because people assume none of this will ever be used. So it's not being done well. Small set of data that is well constructed and really well collected makes the difference.
Oh, wait, I had a...
so sorry.
No problem. So I have a slightly different perspective to answer your question. I have been involved with helping communities audit their data recently. And so I've had access to a couple different data sets where I can see, okay, what have you collected in the last year? And so there's been a couple different case studies, like one where the community gave a very, there was an absence of saying, here's what we want you to do. So I just saw like a natural experiment. If you just let staff run wild, what would they collect? And so that was really interesting to see, like, oh, about 70% of the time they collected contact information because they knew it was important to be able to find a client. But they would rarely collect information about, say, their health issues or something like that. And now that's just an example. But I was looking at the data to say, how frequently are staff collecting this? There was another case study where I saw there was a mandatory field that was particularly required. They said, okay, everybody has to collect this information. And despite the fact that it was mandatory and people were trained on it, they were actually only collecting it 2.5% of the time. And so that's an example where you can see, someone made the decision that this is important to collect, but the frontline staff are not prioritizing it for whatever reason. So that's a place where I would ask a question. So my answer to you is, if you're able to look at the data and see at an aggregate level what is being collected and what isn't, then that'll probably give you some insight.
I want to ask, James Din, I'm from St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. So the question I have, it seems that there are different agencies, different sort of data collection processes, but there seems to go into a common source for coordinated access. But what about between jurisdictions, between provinces? So often I'll, in my role as the MHA for St. John's Centre, we get people not only from different parts of the province, but also different parts of the country who have been homeless in the previous jurisdiction. Now, in some cases, they've been actually living in shelters in the previous jurisdiction. Now they're in the province. And I guess it comes down to sharing that information on that specific person can actually be useful in determining how best to help that person where he or she or they are at that point in time. Just wondering and sharing information across jurisdictions.
Okay, I can tell you that in some communities that are using HIFIS, like I'm going to say Saskatchewan, and I'm going to say also in the future Newfoundland and Labrador, they have a HIFIS instance that covers the whole province. This is also the case in British Columbia. I'm putting an asterisk there. And some other places where, so there is a larger scope of that data sharing. Although it is true that in most communities, the database is isolated to just that one community, so you're not really able to see that. What I would say is like a common issue there is just the consent, right? The client is not giving you consent to talk to the shelter in a different province. But there's really nothing stopping you from asking the client and saying, hey, would it be okay if I spoke with, the shelter in Halifax that you were staying at before, and just like calling them? I mean, that would probably be the best solution to that problem, but that's all on a case-by-case ad hoc basis. Yeah, the data is pretty much by municipality. That's fairly typical.
Hi. Hello, my name is Benoit Langevin. I'm a city councillor in Montreal, and I've been in the official opposition since the last 6 years. And I just want to say that it is really hard to get global information on what is the current status of our own city, and I cannot put more emphasis on the importance of data and its access. One of the biggest problems that we have, and if I do a fair comparison with the epidemic that we just lived through, every day we had updates on how many people were diagnosed with COVID-19, and we had follow-ups every day. And the reason why is because the infrastructure was centralized and there was scientific methods of taking this data, and it was usable. And if ever the sector of homelessness gets to that point of having this data and this language that is shared amongst stakeholders, I think that the situation will evolve a lot rapidly than what it is right now. I have tried during the pandemic, as we saw our shelter being overloaded and trying to open and close temporary installation, that there was no long-term vision because there was no data in order for us to give proper planning or proper critiques about it. So at the political level, it is absolutely important to have a language shared amongst the stakeholders and so that it is also digestible for the general population to understand that there needs to have more investments and there needs to have different levels of investments when it comes into the housing continuum. We can talk about homelessness. Every council, at the end, figures stays, words gets lost in thousands of other files. And so it's absolutely important to have this data in order to make it a priority in a city or in a province. And also the fact that just the arrival of iCount, the dénombrement, that was federally evaluated across the country. Just honestly, there was a lot of critiques on the numbers and the methodology that was used and how it was presented to the citizens. But to be honest, it's pretty much the only fair data that all cities of Canada can apply themselves. And one thing I would love as a city councillor that has been in the file for the past 20 years as an ex-CEO of an outreach program and also co-founder of a shelter, what I realize is that we absolutely have to have a coherent message between all cities of Canada in order to have the biggest funder, which is the federal government in this crisis. So thank you all for your involvement on the data production and the whole work that is being done around that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But you're from Quebec. Quebec needs to, really help us integrate with them. And, for example, homelessness data in Quebec is at a status of confidentiality like no other province. A lot of political work in Quebec is needed so we can integrate into the wider system. Like, I think there is tremendous will to really work with Quebec. But in Quebec, it is a political issue. It is making some adjustments that will allow for better integration with the rest with the other provinces. And I think there is tremendous excitement and will, and very happy to speak and see how we can kind of.
One more thing that I just wanted to add. So the Reaching Home program, they're updating their directives right now, and one of the things they've come out with recently is a very, very comprehensive glossary. Yeah. I think it's open for comment right now.
Yeah, thank you. We're done. Thank you for an amazing session.